Well, let's look forward a little bit. So this is going to be a little light and a little short this morning because, frankly, like Tiny Tim's father said, I've been making much merry this week. Um, so let's talk about New Year's just for a second because it's a good idea to look forward. You can look back and with great clarity, you can see the problems of the year, the struggles for the year. I always remind myself when I look backward at this time of year to remind myself that this place is not my home. This is a temporary place. It's a passing through place that God has found great value in leaving me living in a place that's like neck deep in junk and sin. So that sets my expectations better to realize that if I came out with any good in this year, that's the grace of God. Not that bad stuff violates the year, but this is a place deliberately that God has caused us to grow in the midst of, and it's not your home. So we're passing through. So that's okay. That sets my expectations better. But still, when you look forward in the next year, it's not a bad idea to do what we do, to evaluate looking back, and to anticipate looking forward. There's nothing wrong with that. That's actually really, really good. But what I want to do is focus our attention on what we look forward to in a really simplistic kind of way. So in the new year, it turns out we do a lot of things like these kinds of ideas that, okay, next year I'm going to put on my list, I'm going to wash my hands more often. That's my New Year's resolution. Anybody? Nobody. Okay, it wasn't on my list either. So, but all these healthy things, like I want to do that. In fact, if you had the flu or some really bad colds over through the year, this would be your resolution this year, right? I'm going to wash my hands more often and stay away from people and hide myself in the closet. Or something like, and this might be an unusual one for you, is to say, we do so much online, we text and we type and stuff like that, and we communicate with people. Wouldn't it be nice to a little bit more this year to actually write letters and stuff, to write pieces of paper with a pen? The ink comes out of the pen and it goes on the paper and it stays there. And this particular kind of pen, probably these were going out of style when I was growing up. These are called fountain pens because they have a fountain on them. I could never figure that out as a kid. They don't have a fountain, but they do have liquid ink and they have a reservoir. Maybe that's the fountain. Anyway, anyone going to write more on paper this year? Oh, there's a few. Yes. It's really nice. In fact, as I go through a lot of my old stuff that I have in boxes, I'll come across things that my parents had written for different things, different mundane kind of things, really. And they weren't really cards necessarily. They were just stuff. And I save them and I look at them now and I just treasure them because my folks have been gone for 20 years. And so it's kind of nice to see something written by them. One of them I found was a recipe from my mom that she wrote for me on a card when I went off to college and I had to cook for the first time in my life. So she wrote down a recipe for a very simple recipe. So it's not a, oh, I love you, son, kind of stuff. It's like, well, no, this is where the hot dogs go. And then there's the macaroni. And so that kind of stuff. But it's just nice to see the handwriting stuff. Or maybe this year you want to pick up a new skill or start a new skill, something really attractive that will make you the center of parties. Like if you learn to play trombone, which will not put you in the center of parties, something like that. Or maybe this year you can think about your bucket list. Are you working on a bucket list? Things you want to do? One thing on my bucket list is to actually swim with a whale shark. I think that would be really fun because they're a shark that doesn't eat people, at least not on purpose. Yeah, well, they don't. Let's say it this way: they don't deliberately eat people. So they're so big sometimes you're in the way of the plankton and you get sucked in. So anyway. No, or actually more of our resolutions have to do with food, probably because we all overate this week and we're planning to overeat this week. And so when you get in the new year, you're thinking about food, thinking about your health. And so you're thinking, maybe what I need to do is I need to revise my eating style to help my physical health. Sort of, or maybe I need to revise my eating style, not to help my physical health, but to help my mental health. More bacon, or all that kind of stuff. You know what I'm talking about. We're talking resolutions all the time. What I want to focus on is many times when we look at resolutions, when we look forward in the new year, the question often is what would be best for me? What's good for me this year? And what I want us to focus toward is away from the meanness of resolutions and look more from the God's perspective. What would be the best for God this year in my life? Not what would be the best for me. What would be the best for God this year? And that's often what we don't do. So there's a couple ways to think about this. If I think about what I need to do from God's perspective, all of a sudden a bunch of lists come to mind, lists of do's and don'ts, or like, I see Moses with the 10 Commandments and I think, well, I'll do the 10 Commandments this year. Well, sort of, kind of, maybe. I don't fight against the 10 Commandments. There's great stuff in the 10 Commandments, great stuff. But if that's my working list for the year, that seems a little bit too vague. Jews this day, when they think about obeying God, they have taken the Old Testament and specifically the Torah, which is the Pentateuch, the first 5 books of the Bible, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, and they've taken that and they have gone through it with a fine-tooth comb to come up with all the things that we need to do, all the things we ought to do. And when they make this list, it was first done, in the 11th, 12th century, when this was first done by the rabbis, they came up with exactly 613 of these things. So 613 commandments, or mitzvot is what they call it. So for a Jew today, if you ask them, what does God require of you? They'll say, well, there's 613 of them. What? And if you want to research this more, this website, Jew.fact, is really, really good. And here's the first 16 of the 613 of them. But this was first done by a guy named Maimonides that I wrote up there, 12th century. And many Jews they don't call him Maimonides, they call him Rambam, which I kind of like, Rambam, because that's an acronym, RMBM, because he is Rabbi Moshe ben Maimon. So RMBM, Rambam. So Rambam did this in the 12th century, and he went through and he said, we need to tell the people everything they need to do that the Old Testament says God demands of us. And so he did it. Back in the 12th century, he came up with a list of 613 of them. And to this very day, the 613 list is actually quite well known in the larger Jewish community. How many things does God require of you? They'll say 613. So in this list, I love this online because this JewFAQ, JEWFAQ, frequently asked questions. They actually grouped it in the things we need to do. Like the first 10 right here have to do with your relationship with God, and they're all very good. They're all very good. And then everything about the Torah, which is the first 5 books down here, and he's got quotations where you can find it. And then he decides to go ahead and show you all of the ones that are in there, all 613 of them. So you can go to that website, you can look at all the 613 things that you ought to do based on the first 5 books of the Old Testament, and you can make a list and you can print it out and you can stick it on your refrigerator. Check it twice and make sure you don't violate it. So now that's easier because a lot of these rules have to do with worshiping at the temple, and the temple doesn't exist anymore. So you can scratch those off your list. But the Jews still keep the 613 in case the temple comes back. So there's it's still going. Where are we at? We're at 500. Are you getting this? 613. For an Orthodox Jew, that's a big deal, what you just saw. To be very familiar with that list and to do that list. And so if you ask them looking forward into the new year, what does God require of you? What do you need to do? They'll say, well, there's the 613 things that come out of the Torah, the first 5 books, that were kind of put together by Maimonides, by Rambam. And so that's the list. That's just the list. That's it. That's all I need to do. If you're asking me, what should I do in this next year that would please God, that would be in God's best interest, not so much my best interest, that's the list they would give you. Well, I think that's burdensome, so we're going to get a little easier. Now, Jesus actually had a confrontation with the Pharisees over this very long list, but the list didn't exist until 1,000 years later. But they were very particular about how they looked at the requirements in the Old Testament. So Jesus, in Matthew 23, confronts the Pharisees, and he says in verse 23, "Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites! For you tithe mint and dill and cumin and have neglected the weightier matters of the law." Well, the woe to you that's a way of saying in an alarming way, you're going to die because of what you're doing. Woe to you. This is going to be destructive to you. What's destructive to you? Well, because you're being hypocritical. Why are you being hypocritical? Well, because you're obeying the law, but you're neglecting the law. You're doing some of the law, but not all the law. So in the case of the Maimonides list, that would be you're doing maybe 100 of the 613, but you're deliberately disregarding the other 500. So this is what Jesus is saying to them. And he says, you guys are so good at obeying the law. You take the tiniest things, the tiniest parts of the law, which are in the law. You mean in the law you have to tithe spice seeds? Yes, that's actually there. And you mean the stuff in my cupboard? You mean I have to actually go in and get my little McCormick spice jar and take myself out a 10% pinch and then give it at church? Well, yeah. Why is that in the Old Testament? Well, it turns out that spice is not as common as it is for us today. Spice is very rare back then. Spices in some cultures were used as currency. They were so rare. Columbus sailed the ocean blue because he's looking for spices. It's very valuable and really hard to get. And when you live in a place like Columbus did, where there's no refrigerators, which we are experiencing at our house this week because ours died just before Christmas. Merry Christmas to you. But when you live in a culture where there's no refrigeration, then you're more prone to be experiencing bad food because you stored it too long. Or marginally bad food. Marginally bad food can still be eaten safely if you change its taste just a little bit. That's what spices come in for. So spices are kind of a saving grace for kind of bad food. Anyway, spices were a big deal, and they were in very short supply, and they always came overland or by boat from distant places. That's what made them so valuable. So yeah, in the Old Testament, God's saying when you have these valuable things in your house, you need to tithe those. Really? So this year, I think that's what we ought to do. No, I'm kidding. We're not going to do that. But Jesus calls them out because they're very good at doing the minute things, but they're missing the bigger picture on the law. And this is what he says. You've neglected the weightier matters of the law. Well, things like what, Jesus? Well, things like justice. Okay, that'd be a weighty issue. You're concerned about dill, mint, and cumin, and you've forgotten about justice. You've turned a blind eye to that. Or another thing Jesus says, you're neglecting also mercy. When mercy needs to be given in certain circumstances. The big picture stuff, the big things, not as specific, but more important in terms of their role in terms of religious leaders in their community. How are you guys doing in making sure that justice happens for people and mercy comes to people? Are you doing that? Well, we're doing our dill, mint, and cumin pretty good. Yeah, but what about this? And a third thing Jesus says, you're not only neglecting justice and mercy, but you're neglecting faithfulness. Faithfulness. And that's a pretty big list. Kind of vague in many respects, right? It's not as clear as taking a pinch of cumin out of my McCormick's bottle every year. But still, Jesus is saying you're doing some of the law, the trivial parts of the law, and you're neglecting the profoundly important parts of the law. And this is one of the problems. When you see that 613 list that I just went by, you need to look at that and say, well, which of these are profoundly important and which of these are kind of on the middle ground and which of these are on the trivial side? And what you'll end up doing as a normal human being is you'll do the easy trivial ones because they're more concrete and they're simple to do. And you think you're making ground, you're making traction on doing good stuff for God. I got my cumin seeds pinched into the offering plate last Sunday. But the big things are much more important and they reflect God's nature. And so the law is really a way that Israel and for us would participate in God's nature, in his heart. God's supremely interested in justice. We say this many times. John says over and over, God is love, but also God is just. Love has no definition without justice, which is the way you determine what's good and what's bad for people. If you don't love them, who cares if they're going through bad stuff because you're not thinking about justice? We could go on a lot about that. But justice is a big part of what God's about. Mercy is a big part of what God's about. And his faithfulness to us, his dependability to us, is a big deal. So in a real respect, God wanted to reflect to the world who he was by Israel acting like God himself and reflecting these values so that people in other cultures will look in on Israel and say, I don't understand you guys. How can you be so merciful toward one another? And why is it that you're so profoundly hardline when it comes to justice? That evil is going to make its way into being pushed out of the society. Justice, justice, justice. You guys do that. You don't turn a blind eye to that. You don't tolerate different kinds of I can't think of it. We're corruption. You don't tolerate corruption. So that kind of thing. This is they were a testimony to the world of God's heart. This is God's heart right here. So you're doing the trivial things, which have very little import. You're missing the gigantic things. And then it goes on. And Jesus says, you ought to have done these. These things you ought to have done. That's the mint, dill, and cumin. Without neglecting the others. You need to do all of it. You blind guides, straining out a gnat and swallowing a camel. One of my favorite lines in the New Testament. The idea is you have your cup of tea, you're out camping, and there's flies and gnats in the air. And you get ready to take a sip of your cup of tea, right, like this. Oh, and there's a gnat in there. So what do? You look in there. Oh, man, there's gnats swimming in there like a pool. So what I need to do is strain it through my teeth. And you're doing all this work to strain out the gnats, the little, tiny, insignificant things. And in the process of doing that, you're actually swallowing camels. You're missing the big things. You're missing the big things. You're being so attentive to the little things, and you're not being attentive to the big things. So you blind guides, you are like straining out gnats, but you're swallowing a camel. You're choking on the big stuff. You're doing the wrong things. It's a great picture. It's a great metaphorical picture. Straining out gnats and swallowing a camel. So Jesus understood that when you look at the law in the bigger sense, you need to do the entire law, whether it's the small things, the dill, mint, and cumin, or the larger things and the harder things, but the more important things, justice and mercy and faithfulness. This is how it goes. Jesus also stood next to the Pharisees. I've always thought of this at the end of the Sermon on the Mount. And he says to the people, after he talks about the Sermon on the Mount issues, he says, you know what? Your righteousness needs to exceed the righteousness of the Pharisees. Which, if you're a person in the crowd, you're going, well, how can I do that? I don't even know what the whole law is. The 613 mitzvot hadn't even been published yet. How am I supposed to know what I'm supposed to do, let alone be able to do them all? But Jesus says your righteousness has to exceed that of the Pharisees. Now, he wasn't actually claiming the Pharisees were very righteous. They were making a pretty good attempt based on what they knew. But you had to go far beyond that. You had to go far beyond that. And then he qualifies it and says, because look, here's the deal. Your Father in heaven is perfect, so you got to be perfect. What? So now the ruler, the measure, is not the success of the Pharisees with the law. It's the nature of God himself. That's the unremitting line that the law is. Because the law is a reflection of God's heart and who he is and how he deals with mankind. And it's all loving and just, all that kind of stuff. You got to do much better than the Pharisees, and they have a pretty good shot at doing all of it, but they're still failing. You have to be perfect. Now, in some cultures and some religions, they'll look at that and say, well, Jesus wouldn't have demanded of us that if we couldn't do it, right? No. Because when you look through the rest of the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus is trying to tell you the law, and the law is important, and it's not changing. I haven't come to change a single line of law. It's important. Why? Because the law reflects the nature of God's heart in mankind. That's how we understand who God is, by reflecting that. That's not changing because God's heart is not changing. The issue is, if you want to be part of God's kingdom, you still have to be exactly the same as God's heart. You have to be all those things. You can't come into God's kingdom and with him as a king and be treasuring things like corruption and murder and hate. You can't come carrying those things. You have to be totally clean, 100%. Well, and at that point, it's very clear. Jesus says that in the Sermon on the Mount a couple times. He says, look, let me give you some examples. If you even lust after a woman, you've committed adultery. If it's just a heart issue. But Jesus, I didn't do it. I controlled myself. Yeah, but if you wanted to do it, you were just missing the opportunity. Your heart is devoted to it if you're doing that. And he goes through a whole list of things. You've heard it said that, but I say to you, if it's in your heart, you're still guilty of it. So even when you look at that, the Sermon on the Mount is a way to reset our expectations. The law, in its reflection of the heart of God, is extremely important in order to communicate to a world what this Creator God is like. The problem is that in your own flesh, you cannot do it. You can appreciate it. In the Ten Commandments, there's some great stuff in there. Don't steal. I want to live in a place where people don't steal. I think that's just the best thing ever. There's good stuff right there. But unfortunately, we violate it. I want to live in a place where people don't lie to each other. But you know what? I've stolen stuff and I've lied, which puts me on the other side of the fence. If I want to live in a world that reflects God's heart and his nature, originally reflected in the Ten Commandments, unfortunately, I don't qualify because I violate them. So the law is a touchy subject. Jesus, when he came, said, I didn't come to actually erase the hard parts of the law or to get rid of any parts of the law. No, the law is the law. But I came to fulfill it, which means he's the only one who's come and actually lived it. He lived the 613 mitzvot plus and reflected the very heart of God in how he acted. That's what he's saying. I fulfilled it. I'm the one person who walks around and I'm a living, walking reflection of the law of God, which is a reflection of the heart of God. Just me. So what are we supposed to do into 2026? Go 613 or go these? Well, I want to propose, this is pretty simple. So in the simplification of looking forward into 2026, forget the tithing of the dill, mint, and cumin. You can do that if you want to, but don't do that. Here's an alternate passage, and this one is very famous. It comes from sort of this view. There's three things. Well, there's an older passage back at the end of the Old Testament from Micah 6. And Micah was one of the prophets during the time that the northern kingdom of Israel got taken away into captivity, right, to Assyria. And so Micah says this, and he answers our question, what should we do in 2026? He asks, he prints out, he writes, come on, clicker, Micah 6:8. He has told you. He's told you, man, what's good. He's already told you. Oh, okay. And so what does the Lord require of you? Okay, that's a good 2026 question. What does the Lord require of you? And this is a nice simplification from the 613 mitzvot. And it's threefold again. To do justice, to love kindness, and to walk humbly with your God. So what I want to do this morning is just dwell on those three things for a second and just think about them, ruminate on them. And it's a nice portable thing to carry into 2026. What should I be doing today? Well, what I want to do is make sure that justice is part of how I walk, what I do, that I love loving kindness is something like that. And also the fact that I'm walking humbly with God. So let's just think about that, because that's a tidy, easy, portable list about the next year, which will work its way out in dozens of specifics. But in terms of the objective of reflecting the heart of God in what you do, this is a great place to start. So let's look at them one at a time. So if we do the first one, to do justice, and you're thinking, justice? Justice? This is a hard word to translate into English. It's this word right here. It's mishpat, and mishpat means justice. Yes, it means judgment many times. It's used about judgment in the Old Testament. But it's more kind of, I put in my words, rightness. How do you deal with other people in a right and fair kind of way? For instance, you don't let people get slack when you see them abusing or being bullies to other people. You actually call on the carpet, you get engaged. That's a justice kind of action. You get engaged, say, stop that. This can't go on any longer. Or when people get the raw end of deals and you think that's not right, I will intercede on their behalf on this particular case. I mean, you want to make sure that the right things are happening to people, rightness. Now, in the Old Testament, mishpat means basically all the right things that God does in his loving kindness toward mankind. Everything. It's the whole package. It's not just justice. It's not just interceding when evil is coming down on people. It's not just that. It's about everything that God does for the benefit of mankind. That's justice, which is why mishpat gets used so many times in many places. I mean, it's one of the biggest words of the entire Old Testament. God deals with mankind in a just manner. In a just manner. And so he's engaged for a right. Let me just show you. It's such a divine thing that we don't even have a clue what he's talking about. Jeremiah 8, verse 7, he says, my people know not the mishpat of the Lord. That is the way the Lord deals with mankind in a just way, in a right kind of way, in a fair kind of way, in a knowledgeable kind of way. Men just haven't got a clue about this kind of divine interaction with mankind. But this reflects all the doings of God with mankind. All the doings of God. Or in another place, this is Solomon in Psalm 72. Solomon, the first person, is saying, give the king your justice. Give the king your mishpat, O God, and your righteousness to the royal son, may he judge your people with righteousness and your poor with mishpat. So it sounds like justice. It sounds like a courtroom thing, but it's much broader and much warmer and much more beneficial to mankind. To do everything that's beneficial to mankind, which not only talks about the positive things to mankind, the merciful stuff, the good stuff that God gives, but also deals in a very frank, straightforward way about the destructive nature of evil itself. That's what we normally think about when we think about justice. I mean, you go into a justice court, and the entire system of the justice system is here to make sure that we are all treated well, and that the people who want to engage in evil against us are kind of sifted out of the system. That's what the justice courts are for. If you continue to live a perfectly good and righteous and nice life in the community, you will never end up in justice court. But people who do violate that, the justice courts are there to pull them out. That's a way of saying that sin and evil is destructive, not only to other people, but to yourself. Its presence in our society is bad. Justice, if you love someone, justice is to intercede when that evil is destroying their lives. Now that brings up a whole lot of issues that we don't normally think about. We understand what it's like to love somebody. I get that. That's a principal action of God that's a result of his heart. But engaging on someone when the issue in the middle of the moment is evil. And not only evil that may be visited on them, but they're visiting on other people. We have a responsibility to engage on that, because that kind of evil, that kind of sinfulness, that kind of hyper-selfishness, I call it, is something that we need to step into and say, this isn't right. This is not how you treat other people. And that's what I talked about there on Mishpat, the rightness. That's not right. You don't do that. You don't do that. You need to engage in that. Many times, we are not people who flock into situations that are going to be contentious. We avoid confrontation. Are there any people who go toward confrontation? Okay, there's one. With time, I think we all ought to be, because Jesus engaged for the good of people, even when evil was visiting on them. Evil is not productive for life. Sin, which is super, super selfishly oriented, is not productive for life. Sometimes we have to speak some hard words and say, you need to get out of this. And I've done this with many people who've been involved in many kind of self-destructive, sinful, selfish kinds of behaviors where they're thinking wrong. They don't understand that what they're doing is actually killing them slowly. And they come to me with some of the symptoms that are just starting to emerge from that. And I go, the problem is this kind of behavior it's going to kill you. Well, I don't think so. It's been pretty good so far. No, you don't understand. This is going to kill you. You hate to have those conversations with people and say, can I just say something here? And this is for your own good. You need to get out of this. You need to stop this. Or you need to stop doing this to other people. That kind of engagement on our part is something we don't talk a lot about, but it's very much a part of what this mishpat idea is all about. If you love other people, you will speak frankly about the repercussions of sin and evil in their lives, because it's destructive. It's destructive. Well, I'd rather not talk about it. It's going to be really awkward and confrontive, and they'll think I'm judging them. Well, you're not judging them. You're judging the evil that's killing them. There's nothing wrong with that. So that's part of this mishpat. But then there's the very positive side of mishpat, which is how God deals with mankind in a loving, positive sort of way. So this really, mishpat is really everything that God does out of his love for mankind, which includes facing evil, which includes bringing goodness. All that's mishpat. It's everything. It's everything. It's the actions of God in total. That's what mishpat is. That's why it's kind of hard to translate. And it's something that is so over our heads that even Solomon says, I don't have what it takes to govern this nation of your people. You need to give me your mishpat. You need to give me an understanding of what that's all about. That's a good thing to aim at. Let's do the second one. To do justice and to love kindness. This is one of my favorite parts of this, because these are two more Hebrew words that we've come up with before. It's ahav and chesed. Ahav and chesed. Ahav, there's a cosmetic company out of Israel called Ahava. Have you seen Ahava? So do you know what Ahava means? Love. It means love. That's all it means is love. But a fascinating part of ahava is a word, is in the inside of that word is hav, H-A-V, hav. And you know what hav is in Hebrew? Give. So the core of love in Hebrew is giving. And that gives you an idea that love in a biblical sense is all about what you give to someone else, not what you take from them. And it's also action oriented because it's a gift. It's not just, I have this love in my heart, blah, 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 pitter, patter, patter. It's not just an emotional state. Love is not an emotional state. Love is something that's demonstrated in giving, sacrificially. And so that's actually built right into the word ahav, right there, ahav, ahava. And so when you look in the Old Testament for ahav, you'll see it everywhere, all the way from loving feasts to loving. I mean, the same way we use love in many respects. It's something that you love. But there's always the aspect of giving in that love. It's not like the word like. It's like the word love, I give in the circumstance. So he says in this compound phrase that you need to have ahav, love, and chesed, which we've brought up several times in the past. It's a great messy word. You have to have that big chesed thing in the front of it. Chesed is such a great word. I always liken it to the New Testament famous word for love is agape. We like to talk about that. If you want to go to the Old Testament and talk about love, I don't go to ahav very much. What I do is go to chesed, but together they make kind of a power punch. So chesed is demonstrated love. It's the actions of love. It's the visible manifestation of love. It's action oriented. It's on the outside. When someone sees someone do something loving to someone else, you'll say many times, they're just devoted. They're devoted to them. And you see it in the actions. So when you see chesed, you got to think about the fact that love, again, isn't just an emotion of the heart. It's a demonstrated love that actively and zealously wants to work its way outside. It's love on the outside, not love on the inside. And it's predictable, and it's stable, and it's steady. It's always there, which is why this word chesed many times in the Old Testament is translated in the compound word loving kindness. Kindness is something you do, right? With the love behind it, loving kindness. That's chesed. It's love demonstrated. It's love out there. It's love sacrificial. It's just a wonderful word. It's a wonderful word. So now here it turns out that Micah puts these two words together. Love, love. Love, love. So what he's saying is that I don't want you necessarily to love God. That would be a normal thing to put here. I would put ahav, Yahweh. That's what, to love God. He says, I want you to love the demonstrated acts of love. See, it's a whole different kind of thing. I want you to fall in love with the loving actions of God himself. I want you to look at that and say, I love that. You've probably seen when people do unexpectedly kind things for one another, many times sort of anonymously, because no one knows they don't know anyone's watching. And you see something happen like that. Sometimes you see this in YouTube shorts or TikTok, not frequently, but sometimes. But this wonderful thing happens. And your reaction is, I love that. You're not loving the person, you're loving the action. You're loving what they did sacrificially. That's exactly what this means. What I want you to do as you walk, what does the Lord require of you? The Lord requires of you that you love demonstrated love that's sacrificial. I want to love. I love the love of God, is what he's saying. It's a remarkably different thing. It takes the whole demonstration of love and puts it on a pillar so you can say, I love that when I see that happen. I think the most reactive part when we see good things like that happen is when it's sacrificial, when it costs someone something. And in the New Testament it says, greater love has no one than to basically give up their life for someone else. That's very sacrificial. That's chesed. That's chesed. That's love demonstrated, unavoidably demonstrated. And God so loved the world, he gave his son. Undeniable love demonstrated. Love demonstrated. Love that's just treasured and kept in the heart is not much. It's something. But when it actually works its way out to the outside, love on the outside, chesed. I love to see love demonstrated. What does the Lord require of you? To love, demonstrated love. It has these aspects. It's love in action. It's steady. It's dependable. It's active. It's reliable. It's faithful. It's always there. Love demonstrated, and it doesn't choose time or place. It just does it. It's just love gushing out on the outside. I love that kind of love. Demonstrated love. That's the second thing in this short list. So do justice. Treat people like God treats them. And go for kindness. And lastly, to walk humbly with your God. So those first two are about how you treat other people, largely. This last one is something about who you are as you're going about it. Walk humbly with your God. So this first word, walk, literally in the Old Testament just means go. So he's saying, and as you're going, as you're living life, as you're going here and there, as you're drawing water from the well, as you're cooking bacon on the stove, as you're doing all the things that you do in life, as you're going, you need to do it humbly with God. So the humbly part is this word. It's kind of like a Finnish thing, saunas. Finnish? No, you don't get it. Never mind. It's slightly different. It's sauna. Or sauna. But it really means lowly and modest. And we've talked about this before. Humble in this sense isn't where you kind of abnormally go low all the time. Oh, woe is me. It's kind of a everything's bad and I'm small and you should notice me because I'm really low and I really don't have anything going for me. You know, you're actually artificially lowering yourself below who you really are. But we know humble is not pride, because pride is actually elevating yourself above who you really are, right? Both of those are wrong. So humble just means normal, who you really are, just who you are. That's humble. Not lesser than you are, not more than you are, just, hey, it's me. That's humble. That's humble. You have to have the word because we are prone, because of our selfish sinfulness, to elevate who we are all the time. So we walk a little bit higher than our station all the time. We do this in some protective ways. If you have shortcomings, how many of you walk down the sidewalk and announce your shortcomings to people? Hey, I'm a habitual liar. How about you? You don't do that. So what you do, even though it might be true, what you do is you hide those things. And in hiding those things, you're kind of grooming the outward appearance that you have and making it so that you look a little better than you are. That's pride. Sometimes you exaggerate the things you accomplish and you use those things to kind of put yourself above. And by the way, when I talk about relative above or below, I'm not talking about above or below God. I'm talking about above or below other people. When you elevate yourself above other people by kind of managing the image of who you are so your shortcomings aren't there. They're not announced. And you overemphasize the things that are good. Humble is just being normal, who you really are. Now, how does that apply to humble with your God? Well, it's actually pretty simple, because when we elevate ourselves, we're actually elevating ourselves not only above other people, but closer to God. When I hide my faults, when I work so hard to kind of groom my image that other people see so they don't see the negative sides, I'm actually trying to make myself 100% righteous in their eyes, and only God's 100% righteous. So what he's saying right here is, as you go through life, as you're doing the normal things you do, you need to do it with an accurate understanding of who you are in relationship with God. I'm a person, God's God, and not the other way around. We tend in our selfishness to kind of push our way toward God in terms of who we think we are, but we're not. So he's saying that as you walk, be mindful of who God is. He's singular in all the universe. He's the creator. He's one. He's the only one. And then there's me. In a humble sense, flawed, yes, in many respects. Do I do some good things? Well, yeah, a little. Am I totally good? No, absolutely not. I fall all the time. Usually when someone on the highway does something stupid, it almost gets me killed. At least I think it in my heart. But you know what I'm talking about? So the whole idea about humbly with your God is saying, God's the one who's in charge and I'm not, and this is who I am. Now that has It has profound understanding. Many times, for instance, I'll just give you one example, because as you think about this through 2026, this will come up a lot as you think about it. How do I, in this moment, as I'm going, walk humbly with God in this? And I think one of the easiest examples is when you're wronged by someone and it's not correct. It's not justified at all. You're just wronged by them. And your immediate response is to say, that's not fair. That doesn't reflect who I am. They're going beyond what I've done. That's not me. They're lying about me. I've been wronged by them, unjustly so. And so your reaction at that moment is what? I'm going to make this right. It's the principle of the thing. I'm going to make sure that we get this corrected. After all, they have impugned what little good that I am, and now they've impugned it even worse by lying about me, or whatever it is, But what you're thinking about the entire time is something in the realm of revenge and correction. Because you've been wronged unjustly. That's not right. But you know what? When you walk humbly with your God, you can immediately go to, well, God, you saw that, right? Yeah. Well, God, you know what? Vengeance is yours and it's not mine. So I'm just going to let that go, knowing that you see it and you love me. Here we go. So that's actually the simple context that you can do that, where you say, in my humble understanding of who I am, and my understanding of who God is and our relationship, that modifies everything in my moment right now. It also, on the positive side, pulls you into good. And so when you realize that God is the only one who's good, and then you're in a situation where someone's very needy, but the neediness to be filled would be something that would cost you a lot, or it'd be a little awkward, or it's just like, I just don't feel like doing that today, and you turn a blind eye. There's something about the fact of walking just who you are in relationship to this God who loves you, where you say to yourself, you know what, if God was in my shoes, he would do this. He would do this. And not because I'm anything special, humble, normal, midline, not because I'm anything special, but because that's who my God is, walking humbly with my God. He would do this. I should engage. And I'll just give you one example of that. I talk a lot about people who come into the church here midweek asking for money, hard up cases, stuff like that. And I could tell you stories, and I think I have told you some of those stories. But one story, kind of unusually, I got a phone call from a guy down in Ogden. He was just in downtown Ogden. He was at a Subway sandwich shop. And he said, I'm trying to get back to my family in California, and I'm here stuck. I don't have any money. Well, what do you want me to do? I said, well, he says, it'd be really nice to have just a bus ticket. And now that's a very common line I get from people. I've come here and I'm stuck, and I just need some money to buy transportation so I can get myself out of this. I need to get to this job that I've been offered next week. If I don't have gas money, I can't get there. Or I have family that cares for me. It's a very common kind of line that I've debunked from a lot of people who are lying to me. But this guy, there was something about him on the phone from Ogden, and I said, well, something's different here. So I spent about 45 minutes on the phone with him and became convinced that this is one of those few real cases. One of those few. And I said, well, you're in Ogden and I'm in Brigham City. He says, yeah, I guess this won't work. Well, never mind. Sorry, I bugged you. And he was getting ready to hang up. I said, no, wait a second. I'll come meet you. So I drove down to Ogden, drove down to the Subway, bought him the first food he'd had for about a day and a half. And then I arranged for him to get a bus ticket to go down to California. And then, you walk away after that and you think, did I just get taken? You wonder. But at the same time, throughout that whole process, walking humbly with your God, I'm thinking, this is someone who may be in need, and to the best of my abilities, God, I think this is it's a legitimate need. And so as I walk humbly with my God, I realize, you know what, I should extend God's care to this person. And it might be a ruse, but I have to risk it in this particular case. So I did. 2 months later, he contacted me and he said, thanks for getting me here. I'm in California. And I forgot to tell you thanks for what you did for me that day. You fed me and you sent me on my way to my family. And here I am. Well, now that's the only time in my life that has happened where you realize, hey, that was a good call. But normally in that situation, being the hardened kind of heartless guy that I am, because there's so many other cases where they're just lies. Your initial impression is to say, this is not worth my time. It's just another one of those people. They're making up stuff. This is what goes. And I'm just going to say, nope, don't have the time for that today. You're probably lying to me. And I would, from a probabilistic perspective, I'd probably be right. But I didn't, because I was walking humbly with God. I said, God, if this guy's really needy, you need to show me, and I'll do it. But still. So there is the positive and the negative when it comes to walking humbly with your God. Okay. And so walking in a constant understanding of the presence of God and the heart of God and the fact that he is in you and he's demonstrating himself to wherever you go, you need to constantly be mindful of the fact that that's who you are. You're not just an individual that's separated from God. You're on your own. You're just just doing your own thing. You're actually someone who walks around carrying the Spirit of God inside you, and he's waiting to demonstrate his heart to a mankind through how you react. To walk humbly with your God. The opposite of humble is pride. Proverbs 11:2. When pride comes, then comes disgrace. But with sanah is wisdom. It's wisdom. It's wise to just be who you are. Just to be the normal and to understand that you are a fallen creature that's loved by a creator God, which is an amazing love to start with. That changes everything in the circumstance. So this is my list. This is my list for this year. Not very specific, very short. But when it comes to dealing with people, what I want to do is I want to deal with them justly in the same ways that God deals with them. Be a hardliner when it comes to the destruction of evil. Be a soft heart when it comes to love. Be all those things that God is to those people. That's the mishpah. That's the how God deals with mankind kind of stuff. And then also, what I need to do is I need to love the demonstration of love. I need to love manifest, right? Which pushes me in situations to manifest love in cases where I might not be tempted to, because I don't have the pitter-patter love inside of me. Love from a biblical perspective, both Old and New Testament, has as its core giving. Ahav. It's giving, sacrificial. It's a commitment to do that as well. I want to love that kind of lovingness. And then I want to be mindful all the time of who I am as a normal person, flawed to great degrees, but someone beloved by God who in through me wants to demonstrate who he is, walking humbly with your God. So that's an easy list. Can you remember that list? Another place where that comes up. Remember I said the first two of those is about how you treat men largely, and the last one is how you go with God, this relationship with God. So the first two is relationship with men. The last one is relationship with God as you're going. This came up in the New Testament with Jesus. Do you remember the guy who came up to Jesus and said, Jesus, what's the most important commandment? And he said, to love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and to love your neighbor as yourself. The first two is loving your neighbor. That last one is how you walk with God, loving God. And also, this is taken from a place. Do I have a Bible here? There it is. Hold on. All of this comes from a place in the Old Testament called the Great Shema. Shema. Shema is Hebrew for listen. Listen, Shema, because this passage in Deuteronomy 6 is called the Great Shema because the first word is listen. Here, Shema. So this is Deuteronomy 6:4. It's very, very well known in the Jewish community. And it says, and you'll see all this contained in this. He says, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your might. And these words that I command you today shall be on your heart, and teach them diligently to your family." Love the Lord your God. So if you wanted to distill this down to one instead of three, it would be that. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your might. And in doing that, you also end up, because you love the demonstrated love of God, you ahav the chesed of God, then you start demonstrating that stuff in your life. You start acting like God himself. And you ask God, God, demonstrate yourself through me. I love the love that I have experienced from you. Will you love those around me with that same kind of love that you have? And you walk humbly with your God. Deuteronomy 6:4 and 5, the great Shema. Shema Israel. The Lord your God is one. There aren't other gods. There's just one. So you need to apply all of your efforts to the one God and love him with all your heart, with all your soul, all your might. Don't divide it in other things. Just do it with him. So if 3 is too many, do the one from the Great Shema. But they're all actually tied together. As you look forward into 2026, the issue isn't so much about me. It's really about what God's going to accomplish through you this year. Will life be hard? Life will be hard. Guarantee. This place, up to my neck in sin and junk, and I think it's getting deeper every year. And I wish I wasn't in the midst of this stuff. But in the midst of this place that is so profoundly broken, you are a light. Jesus says, you're the light of the world. He says, you're the light of the world. And Jesus says, he's the light of the world, but he also says, you're the light of the world. He says that in Matthew as well. Will you be a light when you're kind of up to your chin in junk and sin and evil and injustice? And will you actually glorify who God is by being just with other people, by showing this kind of love, of demonstrated love? So it captures your attention. It's actually a zeal for love itself demonstrated. And will you in that whole process walk humbly with God? So when people say, why are you acting like this? You say, because I've been on the receiving end of the great love of God. And I just love demonstrated. I have chesed. Simple. Or just love God with all you are. The end. 2026. See? Simple. Not 613. Okay, let's pray. Father in heaven, we thank you for the clarity of your word. We thank you for the fact that not only are you most concerned about our love for you, but you are concerned that through our lives, as we go, as we find ourselves in different places, both wonderful and sometimes conflicted, sometimes confrontive, but in the places that we go, sometimes pleasant, sometimes unpleasant, that we would demonstrate who you are through our own loving of your loving actions toward us, that we would treat people fairly and rightly like you treat them, and that, Lord, through all this stuff, we'd be mindful of the fact that we're not alone. We're walking with you, and you are in us, and your desire is to make yourself known in this dark place through how we walk with you in humbleness. So thank you. Make that part of our 2026 and lead us in every moment, because we realize this isn't a prescription for how we live ahead of time. It's not a list we check off as we go forward in life. It's an attitude in every step that we take in this walk that you've given us in life. So come with us, we pray, and glorify yourself in us, we pray, in the good and in the hard times as well. So we're yours, and we're delighted to have been the receivers of your great grace and your great mercy and the demonstrated acts of your love toward us, most especially in the giving of your Son. So thanks for all this in Jesus' name. Amen.